Hello everyone. Today we're going to be going over the basics of the NEVERENDERS TCG and how to play it in its current state. Before we begin, if you want to stay updated on balance changes and major updates, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notified when we upload. And if you want to try out the game for yourself and play against others, join the Discord, where you can have access to the Tabletop Simulator mod, share your decks, and discuss balance changes and different archetypes. And with that, let's begin. Before we can learn how to play, we must first learn the anatomy of the game, starting with the cards. The name is the name of the card, and doesn't affect the state of the game too much, with the exception of keywords. Keywords can be the entire name of a card, or can only be part of the name, and are used in effects that synergize with specific keywords. For example, the Grey Goo card has an effect that can search a Grey Goo from your deck or discard to your hand, as well as the Clown card, which can search any card with the word clown in its name from your deck and play it in its previous space. There are many different cards that affect keywords, and they can be used in pretty creative ways. The cost of the card is what is required to be able to play the card on the field. The cost of the card must always be paid before you play the card, unless played through certain effects. Each archetype has a different cost, and will be explained later on in the video. The effects of cards are events that can trigger in multiple different ways and at many different times. There are many different kinds of effects. Some are passive, some are conditional, and some need a cost paid in order to activate them. All effects no longer become active once the card the effects are on leaves the field unless otherwise specified. These effects have different priorities over one another for when multiple events trigger in rapid succession. If you want to learn more about these priorities as well as learn about all the different effects, check out the rules document in our Discord server, linked down below. The attack of the card is how much damage a card will do during your attack step to either the opposing card or to the battle advantage directly when it attacks. This stat can be manipulated by effects and can be raised or lowered depending on the effect. It can be raised with effects such as Inspiring or Grindstone, and can be lowered with effects such as Foul or Scary. Some attack values are variables indicated by an X, which is an intrinsic property of the card and is therefore always active. For example, the mirror variable changes based on the attack value of the opposing card, if there is one. The health of the card is how much damage the card can take before it perishes. This stat can be lowered by either taking damage from another card's attack stat, or from another card's effect that deals damage, such as Aggressive or Stakeout. This stat can also be raised by effects such as Consumer or Health Redistribution. The art and flavor text both add nothing mechanically to the game itself, but sometimes they'll have a silly guy to look at, and I think that's enough for anyone. Now that we've learned about the basic anatomy of the cards themselves, let's take a look at the board. There are several different spaces on the board, each with their own uses and mechanics, so let's go over them. Play spaces are spaces on the field where you can play your cards during your play step. Cards can only be played in these spaces, and if a card is occupying a space, you cannot play another card in that space unless otherwise specified. When a card attacks during your attack step, it will only attack the directly opposing space. For example, a card in space 1 on your side of the field will always attack space 5 on your opponent's side of the field. The battle advantage is the method in which players decide who wins and who loses, which is done by dealing direct damage. If a card in a play space attacks with no card opposing it, it adds points equal to the attack stat of the card in your favor on the battle advantage. Your opponent may also do the same thing by dealing direct damage as well, adding points in their favor. These points are represented by a counter that starts in the middle of the battle advantage, with points in your favor represented by moving the counter up, while points in your opponent's favor are represented by moving the counter down. The bell spaces are spaces where the bells are placed during a game. The bells are used to signal the end of your play step and start your attack step. There are two bells, one on the left side of the field and one on the right side. These bells have special mechanics that will be explained later. The main deck space is where you put your main deck during a game. You must always put your main deck face down on this space unless otherwise specified, usually from another card's effect. The resource deck space is where you put your resource deck during a game. You must always put your resource deck face down in this space unless there are no other unique cards in your resource deck. For example, if you're only running frail entities in your resource deck, you may have it face up. Your sideboard is a set of spaces where you can have up to 5 cards that you can swap with other cards in your main deck in between games. These cards do not affect an ongoing game and cannot be drawn or played. The discard pile is a space where cards that perish go, either through taking damage or through effects, or from smiting a card. Cards in your discard pile must always be face up unless otherwise specified. The general resources space is an area where you store your resources that aren't displayed in any other way, often represented by a token. The fuel meters are meters that display how much fuel you have. The top meter represents your current fuel, while the bottom meter represents your max fuel. Fuel as a cost will be explained later on in the video. The threat spaces are spaces where you place your threat tokens when you allocate them. Just like fuel, threat as a cost will be explained later. And that's all for the anatomy of the board, and hopefully you've gotten a good grasp of the anatomy of the game thus far. Next, we're going to be looking at the different archetypes that you can play in the game. There are 4 different costs in the Arcane Kingdom archetype: diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. To play a card that costs 1 suit, there must be a card that provides or costs that suit on the field. You may kill that card and play the card that costs 1 of that suit in any space. This is known as evoking. You must always play that card after you've evoked another, and suits cannot be collected. For example, Diamond Man costs 1 diamond to play. If there is another card on the field that costs or provides diamonds, you may evoke that card and play your Diamond Man in any space. Cards that cost 2 diamonds require 2 cards on the field that provide diamonds to be evoked to play it, and cards that cost 3 require 3. This applies to all of the suit costs, and you cannot use different suits to pay for the other. Some cards have special effects that provide suits and don't cost a suit. For example, the Lantern resource deck cards all have effects that provide their respective suits, such as Diamond Lantern providing a diamond, Heart Lantern providing a heart, and etc. There are also cards that provide 1 of any suit, such as the Joker and Dark Jester cards. The suits cost is unique in that there are 4 different costs, with each of them specializing in something that the other doesn't. Each cost has upsides, but also have downsides that can be mitigated by running more than 1 of these different suits. Diamond specializes in card draw and deck manipulation, allowing you to play more cards throughout the game and keep your hand size large. However, it lacks consistent damage output in the higher costs. Club specializes in keeping your opponent's cards off the field, with many cards that can be used for removal as well as cards that can sustain your board state. However, many of the lower costs lack any attack at all, so you're more reliant on higher cost cards. Hearts specializes in defense and keeping a good board state, with higher health stats compared to other suits. However, it lacks consistent damage output across the board, meaning it takes a longer time to deal larger amounts of direct damage. Spade specializes in consistent power output, with higher attack stats for each of its cards. However, it lacks the ability to maintain a good board state, making it harder to play more cards. Tickets are cost that is gained passively, and they are represented by a ticket-shaped token in your general resources pile. At the start of your turn, during your draw step, you gain 1 ticket. This happens no matter what, even on your first turn. There is no limit to how many tickets you can gain, but they are not replenished when spent. Tickets can also be gained through other cards' effects, such as the 2 resource deck cards, as well as other main deck cards. For example, the Ticket Booth card generates 2 tickets during your end step, effectively gaining 3 tickets in total during the start of your next turn. And the Tall Freak card generates 3 tickets when it kills an opposing card, effectively gaining 4 tickets in total by the start of your next turn. There's a special type of card in this archetype known as performances. These cards lack any stats at all, relying solely on their effects, which are often used for gaining resources. These cards are discarded immediately after their effects trigger, with few exceptions. They are played by paying their listed cost and then playing them onto one of your empty spaces. These cards can be used for both gaining resources and other archetypes, as well as manipulating the game in unique ways. For example, the donation box card allows you to gain either 1 coin or 3 tickets, allowing you to gain coins in an archetype that wouldn't normally generate them, as well as gain an extra coin in the Silver Bullet archetype. In addition, the Puppet Show card allows you to move your opponent's cards, allowing you to give yourself an advantage over your opponent. Fuel is a meter cost that is represented by the 2 fuel meters. The top meter represents your current fuel, and the bottom meter represents your max fuel. You start your first turn with 1 fuel tank, or 1 current and max fuel. At the start of each of your turns, you gain a fuel tank, and then your current fuel resets to your max fuel if you were to spend current fuel the previous turn. If you would ever exceed 8 fuel, however, you loop back around to 1 max and current fuel. This is called overheating. Certain effects can also provide fuel tanks or cause you to overheat sooner, such as the effects Pressure Bearer or Everburning. Effects that occur when your fuel overheats always activate immediately, regardless of priority. Unlike other archetypes, fuel does not have a special mechanic, instead opting to have many unique effects, such as overheat and Internet of Things. Coins are a resource that is gained exclusively from cards' effects and cannot be gained any other way. Coins are collected in your general resources pile, and there's no limit to how many coins you can have, and they are not replenished when they are spent. To gain coins, you may use either a resource deck card or a main deck card to generate a certain amount of coins. For example, the Root Beer resource deck card generates 2 coins when it moves into an adjacent empty space, and the Bruiser main deck card generates 2 coins when it kills another card. Scenes are cards that are played sideways in an empty space by paying their listed cost, and lack any stats. These cards cannot be attacked or damaged, nor can they block, with opposing cards treating the space as if it was empty. Scenes have effects that change the game in significant ways, either giving you an advantage over your opponent or creating an even playing field for you and your opponent. Scenes can either have passive or manually triggered effects. For example, the Funeral Procession card allows one of your cards to gain 1 attack when one of your cards perishes, while the Gallows card allows you to pay 9 coins to kill every card on the field, including itself. You can only play 1 scene at a time. If there is a scene occupying a space when you play another scene, the first one is discarded and the new one is played. You cannot play cards on top of scenes. Threat tokens are a resource that is gained exclusively through the effects of cards and cannot be gained any other way. However, instead of being collected in your general resources pile, they're collected in the individual threat spaces located under the play spaces. To play a card that costs threat tokens, there must be an equal amount of tokens in a threat space to play it. For example, the Marswalker card costs 3 threat tokens. To play the Marswalker, you must have 3 threat tokens in a threat space to play it. Once the cost is paid, the threat tokens are removed and do not replenish. Orders are special symbols located in the card's effect box that give a card a certain order, shown here. There are Greys, Reptilians, UFOs, Androids, and Encounters. Orders do nothing on their own, but other cards have the ability to manipulate cards with those orders to give them effects, boost stats, and trigger other effects. For example, the Dark Matter card has an effect that gives 1 attack to all of your Grey cards on play, and the Ground Beacon card has an effect that allows you to search a Reptilian card from your deck to your hand when damaged. Effects that manipulate cards with orders will have the order symbol next to the order's name in the effect box to show which order it will affect at a glance. And that is all for the different archetypes, but before we can talk about playing the game, we must first talk about counters. Counters are not a cost that is used to play cards, rather counters are a mechanic that spans over the vast majority of Neverenders. Most archetypes have some way to interact with counters, whether it's generating them, having them on cards themselves, or even on opposing cards. Once played on a card, you cannot move the counter to another card unless using an effect that can do that. Similar to how other token resources are gained, counters can only be gained with the effects of cards. They're only removed from play once the card with a counter on it perishes, or using an effect that can remove counters from play. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about actually playing the game. Neverenders is played with 2 decks, the resource deck and the main deck. both of which are fundamental to playing the game. The resource deck consists of 20 cards total and are mainly where the cost's resources will be gained from. The way you can tell a resource deck card apart from a main deck card is if the card has a gold or silver back. If it's gold, it's a main deck card. If it's silver, it's a resource deck card. Certain costs are provided during your initial turn, such as fuel and tickets, as you start the game with one of each. Other cards' costs must be gained through the effects of their resource deck, such as coins and threat. Lastly, other cards depend on the resource deck card itself to provide an initial cost of a card, such as suits. You are allowed to run as many unique cards in your resource deck as you want, as long as the max amount of cards in it is 20. The main deck consists of 30 cards total. Within there are 3 types of cards: Basics, Classics, and Characters. Basics are the most accessible cards, being able to run 3 copies of the card within your deck. Effects on these cards are shared by many other cards, but each card contains a unique set of effects, stats, and cost. Basics are identified by their playing border, as shown on screen. Classics are cards that are generally more powerful than basics, and are identified by their border, which has a look that's specific to that archetype. As for your deck, you may only want one copy of a classic in your deck, with a maximum of 4 unique classics per deck. Keep in mind that classics are included in your count of 30 maximum cards in your main deck. Lastly, characters. They have a border similar to basics, but with full art instead of only being contained to the art section of the card. Characters should be the epitome of how you play your deck, and while they are integral to winning, they should aid or complete the idea of your deck. You're allowed to only run 1 unique character card per deck. Once your and your opponent's decks are constructed and players are ready to play, they must both roll a 6-sided die, or a d6, to determine who goes first. Both players roll simultaneously, and the player who rolls the highest number decides who goes first and who goes second. After determining who goes first, both players will draw their opening hand. This consists of drawing 1 card from your resource deck and 4 cards from your main deck. On each player's initial draw step, they may decide to mulligan their hand, which consists of returning cards to their respective deck, shuffling, and drawing a new opening hand. Each player only gets 1 chance to mulligan their hand, then on subsequent turns, they are not allowed to do so. During subsequent draw steps, you may gain any resources such as fuel or tickets. Additionally, any cards that provide a resource during your draw step are also gained before drawing. Afterwards, you may select a deck to draw from. If you are under 4 cards, you may choose a deck and draw from that deck until there are 4 cards in your hand. If you are above 4 cards when selecting a deck to draw from, you only draw 1 card. After drawing your card, but before the play step, any effects that would be activated now trigger. During your play step, you may play cards from your hand, use cards' effects, and gain additional resources, though a majority of the player's time should be spent strategizing on where to play cards and manipulating your or the opponent's field. To play cards from your hand, you must first pay its cost, and then play it onto any empty space. Once a player is satisfied with the current state of the board, they may ring either bell on each side of the field to end their play step. You may also remove any card on your side of the field by causing the card to perish and be discarded. This is known as smiting and can only be done once per turn. Starting your attack step, you have rung a bell on either side of the field. Your cards then attack the directly opposing spaces unless otherwise specified. Each card does not attack until all its effects that activated due to the previous card's attack have resolved. To determine how cards attack and which cards' effects take priority over each other, the bell that was rung decides how cards will resolve. If you have rung the left bell, cards will attack from space 1 through 5 in that order. However, if the right bell is rung, cards will attack from space 5 through 1 in that order, giving you an extra layer of strategy when playing against someone. It should be noted that during your initial attack step, none of your cards attack. Finally, the end step is the resolution of your turn, occurring immediately after the attack step has resolved. Depending on the bell that was rung, all end step effects will trigger in the order of spaces from that bell. Some effects will generate resources, allow you to move cards, or cause a card to perish. Each card does not resolve their effects until the previous card's effects have resolved. Once all of these effects resolve, your opponent begins their turn, and this repeats until either player wins the game. to win the game, you must deal enough direct damage to move the counter up 8 points to the upper end of the battle advantage. The difficulty in this is making sure that you can consistently deal direct damage while making sure that your opponent can't, since if your opponent deals direct damage as well, the counter will move down the battle advantage. Once either player deals enough damage to the battle advantage, the game ends. This has been How to Play Neverenders, and we hope you've enjoyed learning how to play our game. If you want to try building your own deck or play against someone, join our Discord, where we have extended rules, a Tabletop Simulator mod, and much more. If you want to stay updated on news about the game, be sure to subscribe to the channel for all the latest updates. And with that, we hope you have a great day.